WWA Retribution. Thumbs up 17 votes, 32.1%, thumbs down 15 votes, 28.3%, in the middle 21 votes, 39.6%. Best match poll number 1, Shark Boy vs. Frankie Kazarian 19. Number 2, Mike Sanders vs. Joe E. Legend 17. Worst match poll 1, Lex Luger vs. Sting 22 votes. Second worst match, Bagwell and Swinger vs. Smiley and Malice 9 votes. When the World Wrestling All-Stars promotion debuted in October of 2001 with an Australian tour, it was something of a deal in that it was the first attempt at starting something that would rival WWF. It's really clear that the lack of buzz for the February 9th pay-per-view show, taped on December 6th in Glasgow, Scotland, that with NWA TNA running weekly and really not making much of a breakthrough, there is no longer any interest or curiosity in just seeing an alternative brand, even one promising the first appearances of Sting and Lex Luger to the US public since the folding of WCW, and the curiosity of seeing Nathan Jones after all his WWE TV build-up but before his WWE in-ring debut. But what people missed wasn't a bad show at all. The Retribution show featured some good wrestling, and in particular, a hot crowd. The Glasgow audience reacted big to good in-ring wrestling, and enjoyed any attempts at entertainment. None of the matches were dull, and all came across better than they looked on paper, with the exception of Conan's match, which never took place and was just a comedy spot. The only negatives of the show was the expected in-ring work of Buff Bagwell, who looked bad, but a little better both physically and wrestling-wise than he had on previous tours, and Luger. The lighting could have been better as they had a rabid and packed house, but it was dimly lit like one of those old-time shows where they would do so to hide the empty seats. Luger vs. Sting would be a winner for worst pay-per-view main event of the year most years, after an amateur hour match with Bob Sapp vs. Ernesto Hoost a few weeks back. This is probably going to have to settle for second. Luger, at 300 pounds, looked like a taller and more cut version of Dick the Bruiser, but without Bruiser's charisma. Reports that Luger was fat were incorrect. He was like a blown-up bodybuilder, huge everywhere, with a good-sized but muscular gut. At 44 years old, all that weight worked against him in the ring as he blew up fast and could barely move. It's really a strange mentality as to why somebody at his age and with his money would want to do that to themselves, let alone think in the modern era of wrestling that looking like a statue and without mobility would get you a job in WWE. Then again, Luger's interview was funny as well, talking about not liking to lose, whether it be playing Monopoly, checkers or chess with my kids, which comes across far too domesticated and civilized for what bloodthirsty wrestling fans want to hear their heroes are doing. Sting wasn't much better, talking about going home and raising a family since people last saw him. It came across as two guys who had mentally retired from wrestling coming back for a paycheck, which is largely what it was. Our response was down 62% from the first WWA pay-per-view, which also a taped show from overseas, which took place on October 26, 2001 in Melbourne, Australia, and aired a little more than 2 months later. The difference is clearly that TNA is in the equation and that wrestling interest has dropped. As with Sting's first match that the public would see since WCW went down should be a bigger deal than what was offered on the first show. The second show was hyped around Randy Savage and also aired live and was from Las Vegas, so should have had more interest. There are plans of doing another US pay-per-view taping on the next tour, which has shows on May 2 in Melbourne, May 3 in Sydney and May 4 in Auckland, New Zealand. Wrestlers confirmed on the tour are Johnny Swinger, Simon Diamond, Shark Boy, Joe E. Legend, Mike Sanders, Chris Sabin, from Border City Wrestling, Jeff Jarrett, Glenn Gilberti, and Malice. Sting has agreed in principle to a deal but hasn't signed yet, and both Perry Saturn and Sabu have agreed so long as it doesn't interfere with Japanese bookings. There are negotiations with both Don Callis and Joey Styles going on about announcing the next show, but neither has committed. The surprise on the 2-hour show is they went off the air with Luger as new champion. The original idea we'd been told for this show is because the decision was made not to bring back Luger, because of his out-of-the-ring behavior and him being so much of a pain. They did a title switch on December 13th in Zurich, Switzerland, where Sting got the title, in a 3-way, pinning Malice instead of Luger, who wouldn't drop the title clean. We were told that the match where Luger won the title, as well as lost the title, would both appear on this pay-per-view, so the show would end with Sting, since he was coming back as the top draw, as champion. For whatever reason, the Zurich match never aired, nor was it referred to, and the show ended with Luger as champion. 1. Shark Boy pinned Frankie Kazarian in 6:17. Entertaining opener that the crowd was really into. Hot opening with Kazarian taking a whip and flying, and I mean flying, over the top rope like he was shot out of a cannon. This put to shame the similar move trademarked by Harley Race and Sergeant Slaughter in their primes. Shark hit Kazarian with a pescado. I've been waiting years for that sentence. Shark bit Kazarian and the ref in the butt. Shark kicked out of a Japanese ocean suplex, which Kazarian called Back to the Future, and got the pin with a diamond dust, which Shark Boy calls the Dead Sea Drop. 3.25 stars. Sanders, as babyface commissioner, had a confrontation with Legend. Sanders tried to do a Rock-like promo making fun of Legend. Came off pretty good. 2. Conan pinned Nate Webb in 03. Before the match, Perry Saturn laid out Webb with a power bomb, Death Valley driver in the rings of Saturn. Conan danced out and pinned Webb. Disco Inferno, doing the announcing with Jeremy Borash, and Disco was very entertaining until maybe the end of the show, as his style of self-deprecating humor can't go 2 hours. Went on and on how Conan set a pay-per-view record for fastest pinfall, and said it was a 4 stars match. Teo and Puppet the Midgets hit on Midaja, who wasn't fully dressed. Teo wanted her as his girlfriend and gave her flowers. Puppet called her a hoe and wanted to know how much she would charge him. Sanders came out and did the requisite short people jokes and ordered a match with Midaja as ref. She noted she had never riffed before. 3. Buff Bagwell and Johnny Swinger beat Norman Smiley and Malice in 10 minutes. Bagwell versus Smiley stuff was awful, but even so, Bagwell looked in better shape and wrestled better than he did on his previous tours or when he was in TNA. Borash talked about Malice being a member of the new church. However, Smiley and Malice played face in the match. Disco said that the Big Wiggle should be banned and Smiley needed to wear larger trunks. The wrestling was bad, but the crowd was still entertained by Smiley's antics. Swinger gave Smiley a low blow as he was big wiggling him. Bagwell hit the blockbuster on Smiley, allowing Swinger to pin him. Half 1 star. 4. Teo, which stands for Totally Outstanding, pinned Puppet in 320 with a Swanton bomb. Teo tried a 619, but got caught up in the ropes. After the match, Saturn hit the ring, gave Teo a DVD, The Move, not a movie, and put the rings on Puppet, then dragged out Midaja against her will. Apparently kidnapping is not a crime in Scotland. 1 star. 5. Sanders pinned Legend in 912. Sanders bled from above the eye from a clothesline. Crowd was very into the match and they did a lot of near falls. This was one of those bouts that in the US wouldn't have been much because the crowd wouldn't have responded, but here, they looked past the lack of name power and just were having funs with a fast-paced match. Borash kind of knocked WWE for making the decision to fire both guys. Sanders won with a superkick. 3.25 stars. 6. Jeff Jarrett pinned Nathan Jones in 542 to retain the NWA title. Borash never gave a speech about the history of the NWA title, but did say that you can watch Jarrett defend it every Wednesday night on pay-per-view on NWA TNA. They plugged TNA as often as they could during the match. This was the bout where Jones gave Jarrett a blow that required stitches. They probably edited the blow itself out of the match. Borash said that if Jones were to win, he'd be defending it on TNA. Jarrett played face here, which gets weirder. Goofy finish as Jarrett threw the ref into Jones. Jones acted as if he was going to choke slam Jarrett, but instead snatched the ref. This was so weird, because it was like he had this iron grip that when it was the ref, he couldn't let go. He threw the ref down, allowing Jarrett to do a guitar shot for the pin. In another era, boy would WWE have been furious about this, and boy would TNA have shown the clip weekly forever. But nobody saw this show, so it really is like a tree falling in an empty forest. 1 star. 7. Sabu won a 3-way over Diamond and Saturn in 1620 with a triple jump moonsault on Diamond. Saturn had walked out of the match when Puppet and Teo came out and both stripped Midaja down to her undies. That angle was weird because moments earlier, after being kidnapped, Midaja asked interviewer and tour booker Scott D'Amore for help. Of course he did nothing. Then, in this match, when the minis came out to save the day for Midaja, she decided she'd rather be kidnapped than be with a short guy, I guess. Either that or Patty Hart was the booker. Disco said that Sabu was one of the greatest pay-per-view performers in history. Somehow I don't expect that line to be repeated by many people. Saturn has a bunch of new tattoos. Sabu was blooded from a kick. Your basic Sabu spot show. Crowd loved it early, got bored with it at one point, but popped for the table breaks and big spots at the end. 2 stars half. 8. Luger pinned Sting in 709 to win the vacant WWA title. Much of that was Luger stalling. I couldn't believe how slow Luger was moving and how quick he got out of breath. Finish was a mess. Luger pulled the ref in the way of a Stinger splash, except Sting barely touched the ref. Ref sold it anyway, because he had 2. Jarrett, who was a face, turned heel, hitting Sting with a guitar shot. Sting kicked out of the pin. Finish of the match was another ref bump and another guitar shot by Jarrett. If this was a high-profile pay-per-view that people saw, this would be a worst match of the year candidate. As it was, I've seen far worse matches on TNA and W1 already this year. -1/2 of 1 star. The February 10th Raw drew a 3.9 rating. We don't have much in the way of details on the ratings other than it had a great ratings pattern of consistent growth, and the overrun where McMahon named Bischoff general manager after Jim Ross saved his job ended up doing a 4.8. The rating in a sense could be labeled a slight disappointment because of the hype of the 30 days, but it was way up from the previous week, and T was going against the final episode of Joe Millionaire, 14.2 rating and 20 share head-to-head. SmackDown on February 6th drew a 3.34 rating, 3.27 first hour, 3.41 seconds hour /3.80 realistic rating /est. 5.35 million viewers. Most of the decline can be credited with the ABC 2020 special interview with Michael Jackson, which drew a 16.8 rating. SmackDown was down 3.5% from the previous week, but the show also featured a face-off with Hogan and Rock, and Hogan's appearance was heavily promoted as opposed to his surprise the previous appearance. That can be compared with a 6% drop in CSI, to 15.6 and 10% drop in Friends, to 14.7 for the half-hour first-run show. A repeat show immediately following did a 13.6, from the previous week. Overall, UPN finished in 4th place out of the 6 networks. The show did a 6.1 in New York, 4.3 in Los Angeles, 5.6 in Chicago, 4.3 in Philadelphia, 2.9 in San Francisco, 4.0 in Dallas, 3.9 in DC, 3.3 in Detroit, 4.5 in Atlanta and 6.2 in Houston. Peak rating was all over the place as the Benoit vs. Angle main event was the peak in New York and Atlanta. Los Angeles and Houston peaked with Guerreros vs. Benjamin and Haas title change. Chicago with The Undertaker Brother Love, Angle, Philadelphia and Detroit with interviews with Cena and Benoit and Angle. San Francisco with Mysterio vs. Noble, Dallas and DC with a Hogan-Rock verbal confrontation. Low points were mainly early. Only markets that didn't have the first segment as the lowest were New York, Chicago and Philadelphia with Rikishi vs. Nunzio, San Francisco with the Cena and Benoit/Angle promos, and Atlanta with Guerreros vs. Benjamin and Haas. After the initial growth, the Brother Love/Undertaker segment and Kidman vs. Hardy match added 75,000 new viewers. Usually that's a strong growth period, but with Friends having a second showing, the strong growth period should have been later. Guerreros vs. Team Angle title switch lost 36,000 viewers, and this would have included the period after Friends ended, making the loss of viewers for this match more significant than it sounds. The Hogan-Rock segment added 288,000 new viewers and was the peak rating on the show at 3.57. The promos with Cena and Benoit and Angle in the Kendrick Streaker deal lost 362,000 viewers, and Angle vs. Benoit gained 0 viewers, with the main event doing a 3.34. Raw on February 3rd drew a 3.4 rating off hours of 3.3 and 3.6. We don't have any other details on it, but that number had to be a major downer coming off the big rating the previous week, and I guess the non-deliverance of Austin didn't help matters. But even so, Austin's return on its own will be a very short-lived fix, just like Hogan's, without a new feel. This number is equivalent to what the show bottomed out at during football season if you take out the usual bounce back the show gets in January. We got an update on the January 30th SmackDown show, which are the adjusted numbers including all the weekend airings of the show preempted on the Thursday night. Show ended up doing a 3.46 rating, 3.51 first hour, 3.41 seconds hour /3.93 realistic rating /est. 5.54 million viewers. It would have ranked as the first week where SmackDown's realistic number was lower than Raw, which did a 4.06 for that same week. We did get a more detailed segment breakdown as well. Kidman vs. Matt Hardy gained 170,000 new viewers, but that also needs to be noted it was in the easiest gain spot of the night because it's when Friends ended. The segment with Vince McMahon doing the interview and the beginning of the Rock promo added 297,000 new viewers to a 3.81 rating, which was the peak rating of the night. The rest of the Rock promo along with Rikishi vs. DeMott, which was likely dragging the segment down, lost 162,000 viewers. The Undertaker Heyman segment with Brian Kendrick singing Telegram lost 455,000 viewers. The main event of Benoit and Edge vs. Benjamin and Haas for the title shot lost another 353,000 viewers to a 3.26 rating. The bad news about that match is that it continued to lose viewers throughout the match. Normally long matches on SmackDown, and Raw for that matter, may lose viewers early, but have gained them back toward the end. In other demos for the show, it did 5.1 among male teens, 1.5 among female teens, 2.9 among males 18 to 34 and 2.1 among females 18 to 34. For the weekend of February 2nd and February 3rd, Velocity did a 0.6, Confidential did a 0.7 and Heat did a 1.0. Television Lucha Libre on February 2nd and February 3rd, which were both old material, drew a 0.88 Hispanic rating within the Galavision universe on February 2nd and 1.56 on the next day when people would have expected new material. Results. February 5th Nashville, NWA TNA Pay-Per-View 1100 Jimmy Rave b. Matt Seidel, David Young and Tony Mamaluke b. Lex Lovett and Rod Steele, Chris Harris and James Strawn b. Rocky Reynolds and Jason Rumble, Kid Cash b. Shark Boy, Jorge Estrada b. Glenn Gilberti, X Division, Sonny Siaki b. Amazing Red, Tenacious Z b. BG James, Ron Killings won 4-way elimination match over Jerry Lynn, Mike Sanders, and David Flair, Trinity b. Desire. Tag titles. Low-Key and Elix Skipper NC/ and Brian Lee, titles held up February 5th Louisville, OVW TV tapings. Renee Dupree b. Rob Conway, Chris Canyon b. Johnny Jeter, Travis Bain and 7 b. Orlando Jordan and Chris Cage, Jazz and Linda Miles b. Nikita and Jackie Gaeta, Matt Morgan b. Mark Magnus, OVW title Damage b. Nick Dinsmore DQ, Nova and Reiner b. Christopher Nowinski and Doug Basham. February 6th Sendai New Japan 2500 Ryusuke Taguchi b. Naofumi Yamamoto, Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto b. Kengo Kimura and El Samurai, Makai Club I and 2 b. Toru Yano and Blue Wolf, Tiger Mask and Super Crazy and Curry Man b. Jushin Liger and Geto and Jado, Masahito Kakihara and Takashi Iizuka b. Makai Club 4 and V. Perry Saturn and Josh Barnett b. Manabu Nakanishi and The Heat, IWGP Junior title, Koji Kanemoto b. Minoru Fujita, Tadao Yasuda and Rishi Yanagisawa and Kazunari Murakami b. Yuji Nagata and Yutaka Yoshi and Shinsuke Nakamura, Yoshihiro Takayama and Mike Barton and Jim Steele b. Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan, and Osamu Nishimura. February 7th Houston WWE Raw 3500, Scott Steiner b. Christian, Jacqueline b. Molly Holly, Sean O'Hare b. D'Lo Brown, Tag titles, William Regal and Lance Storm b. Dudleys, Spike Dudley b. Steven Richards, Kane and Rob Van Dam b. Rosie and Jamal, Chris Jericho b. Test, Booker T b. Dave Batista. February 7th Yamagata New Japan 1500 Blue Wolf b. Naofumi Yamamoto, El Samurai b. Ryusuke Taguchi, Geto and Jado b. Tiger Mask and Super Crazy, Osamu Nishimura and Yutaka Yoshi b. Kengo Kimura and Hiro Saito, Jushin Liger and Koji Kanemoto and Minoru Fujita b. The Heat and Masahito Kakihara and Curry Man, Mike Barton and Jim Steele b. Manabu Nakanishi and Toru Yano, Josh Barnett b. Tatsutoshi Goto, Perry Saturn and Shinya Makabe and Yoshihiro Takayama b. Tadao Yasuda and Rishi Yanagisawa and Makai Club 2, Yuji Nagata and Masahiro Chono and Takashi Iizuka and Hiroyoshi Tenzan b. Makai Club I and 4 and V and Kazunari Murakami. February 7th Mexico City Arena Mexico, EMMLL TV tapings, Explosivo and Neutron and Sombra de Plata b. Pulvora and Super Commando and Valentin Mayo, Mazada and Nozawa and Katsushi Takemura b. Safari and Virus and Volador Jr., Felino and Ricky Marvin and Negro Casas b. Damian El Terrible and Emilio Charles Jr. and Zumbido, Atlantis and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Vampiro b. Dr. Wagner Jr. and Pierre Roth Jr. and Tarzan Boy, Shocker b. Ultimo Guerrero. February 8th Fresno WWE Raw 4500 Booker T b. Christian, Jacqueline b. Molly Holly, Spike Dudley b. Rico, Sean O'Hare b. D'Lo Brown, Tag titles, William Regal and Lance Storm b. Dudleys, Kane and Rob Van Dam b. Rosie and Jamal, Tommy Dreamer b. Steven Richards, Chris Jericho b. Test, Scott Steiner b. Dave Batista. February 8th Tokyo Differ Ariake, Noah Multi-Promotional Junior Tournament First Day, 1800 Sellout, Kohei Mikami and Kudo, DDT, B. Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Chocoball Mukai, WEW, Katsuhito Takaiwa and Yoshito Sasaki 01, B. Ikuto Hidaka and Masao Orihara, In, Kanda and Kotaro Suzuki, NOAH, B. Great Takeru and Kapakozu, IWA, Ultimo Dragon and Masato Yoshino Toriuman, B. Jun Kasai and Grand Naniwa, Indiana, Takaiwa and Sasaki B. Mikami and Kudo, Dragon and Yoshinobu Suzuki and Kenna. February 8, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, Japan, 2100 sellout, Nobukazu Hirai B. Taichi Ishikari, Tomoaki Honma and Kazushi Miyamoto and Sanshiro Takagi and Tomohiko Hashimoto B. Shigeo Okamura and Hideki Hasaka and Ryuji Hijikata and Yuto Aima, Kaz Hayashi B. Airwalk Spriggan, Amazing Red Extreme Blade Ilix Skipper, and Gran Hamada B. Kendo Kashin and Super Dragon, Gigantes, Jerry Toot, and the Gladiator and Arashi B. Keiji Muto and Jimmy Yang and Masafuchi, Genichiro Tenryu B. Nobutaka Araya, MLW title Satoshi Kojima B. John Tena. February 8, Queens, New York, Ring of Honor, 675, Easy Money won 4-way over Chad Collier, Michael Shane, and Colt Cabana, Don Juan and Hot Stuff Hernandez and Fast Eddie B. Carnage Crew, Jay Briscoe B. Mark Briscoe, Steve Corino B. Homicide, Ton and Marcos NC Outcast Killers, CM Punk B. CW Anderson American Dragon B. Samoa Joe, Paul London won 3-way over Low Key and AJ Styles, Ring of Honor title, Xavier B. London, Hit Squad and Divine Storm and Jose and Joel Maximo and Mikey Whipwreck B. Jody Fleisch and Izzy and Dixie and Slim J and Deranged and Angel Dust and Hydro and Diego and Slugger. February 8, Philadelphia, CZW 450, John Dahmer B. Jude, Adam Flash and Ian Knox won 3-way over Z-Bar and Chris Styles and Hurricane Kid and Derek Frazier, GQB Ty Smiley, Grim Reefer won 3-way over Mike Mayhem and Livewire, Nick Burke B. Stefan B-Boy B. Rick Blade, Ruckus Kersonier Dutt, Greg Matthews and Rockin' Rebel B. Tatanka and Heartbreaker tag titles, Johnny Cashmere and Trent Acid B. Nick Gage and Nate Hatred to win titles, CZW and Iron Man titles, Nick Mondo B. Messiah to win titles. February 9, San Diego, WWE Raw 5000, Booker T. B. Christian, Rico B. Tommy Dreamer, Victoria won 3-way to keep women's title over Jacqueline and Molly Holly, Spike Dudley B. Stephen Richards, Sean O'Hare B. D'Lo Brown, tag titles, William Regal and Lance Storm B. Dudleys, Rob Van Dam and Kane B. Rosie and Jamal, Chris Jericho B. Test, Rey Mysterio B. Eddie Guerrero, Scott Steiner B. Dave Batista. February 9, Tokyo Differ Ariake, Pro Wrestling Noah Multi-Promotional Junior Tournament, 1,800 sellout, Great Takeru B. Kapakozu, Masao Orihara B. Ikuto Hidaka, Chocoball Mukai and Tetsuhiro Kuroda B. Grand Naniwa and Jun Kasai, Kenta and Kotaro Suzuki B. Kohei Mikami and Kudo Junior Tournament Finals, Ultimo Dragon and Masato Yoshino B. Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Yoshito Sasaki. February 9, Osaka, New Japan, 2,200, Toru Yano B. Ryusuke Taguchi, Akira B. El Samurai, Jushin Liger and Koji Kanemoto and Geto and Jado B. Tiger Mask and Super Crazy and The Heat and Curry Man, Mike Barton and Jim Steele B. Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto, Perry Saturn and Josh Barnett B. Manabu Nakanishi and Blue Wolf, Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Shinsuke Nakamura and Osamu Nishimura and Yutaka Yoshi B. Makai Club Iron 4 and V and Rishi Yanagisawa, Tadao Yasuda and Kazunari Murakami B. Takashi Izuka and Masahito Kakihara, Masahiro Chono and Yuji Nagata B. Yoshihiro Takayama and Shinya Makabe. February 9, Sendai All Japan 3000, Masafuchi B. Taichi Ishikari, Tomoaki Honma and Sanshiro Takagi and Kazushi Miyamoto B. Arashi and Nobukazu Hirai and Ryuji Hijikata, Gran Hamada and Jimmy Yang B. Kendo Kashin and Airwalk Spriggan, Hirotaka Yokoi and Kohei Sato B. Hideki Hasaka and Shigeo Okamura, Gigantes and the Gladiator and Super Dragon B. Keiji Muto and Yuto Aima and Extreme Blade, Genichiro Tenryu and John Tena B. Satoshi Kojima and Kaz Hayashi. February 9, Dallas Promociones Torres 3000 sellout, Octagon Cheeto and Mascarada Sagrada B. Pierrotito and Piratita Morgan, Phantasma and Solar and Fishman BC and Caras and Mascara Año 2000 Universo 2000 DQ, El Hijo del Santo and Atlantis B. La Parca and Brazo de Plata. February 10, Los Angeles, WWE Raw/Heat tapings, 10,000, Sean O'Hare B. Mike Headinga, Outlaw Mike Knox, Keiji Sakota and Scullu, King Adamo and 01, B. Frankie Kazarian and Marshall Knox. Women's title, Victoria B. Jacqueline, Spike Dudley B. Christopher Nowinski, Stephen Richards B. Aaron Aguilera, Lance Storm and William Regal B. Maven and Al Snow, Tess B. Christian, Booker T. B. D'Lo Brown, Jazz B. Molly Holly, Rob Van Dam and Kane B. Rosie and Jamal, Dudleys and Spike Dudley B. Chief Morley, Dave Batista B. Tommy Dreamer, Chris Jericho B. Jeff Hardy. February 10, Nagoya, All Japan, 1,500 Masafuchi B. Taichi Ishikari, Tomoaki Honma and Kazushi Miyamoto and Sanshiro Takagi B. Nobutaka Araya and Nobukazu Hirai and Ryuji Hijikata, Extreme Blade and Airwalk Spriggan B. Super Dragon and Kendo Kashin, John Tena and Gigantes and Gran Hamada B. Satoshi Kojima and Shigeo Okamura and Yuto Aima, Genichiro Tenryu B. Hideki Hasaka, Keiji Muto and 200% Machine, Yoji Anju, and 884% Machine, Kaz Hayashi, beat the Gladiator and Arashi and Jimmy Yang. February 11th Gifu, New Japan 3000, Blue Wolf B Naofumi Yamamoto, Super Crazy and Curry Man B Geto and Jado, Perry Saturn and Tatsutoshi Goto and Hiro Saito B Osamu Nishimura and Yutaka Yoshi and Toru Yano, Jushin Liger and Koji Kanemoto and El Samurai B Tiger Mask and Akira and The Heat, Josh Barnett B Masahito Kakihara, Makai Club 4 and VB Takashi Iizuka and Manabu Nakanishi DQ, Yoshihiro Takayama and Shinya Makabe and Minoru Fujita B Makai Club I and 2 and Ryushi Yanagisawa, Mike Barton and Jim Steele B Tadao Yasuda and Kazunari Murakami DQ, Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan B Yuji Nagata and Shinsuke Nakamura. February 11th Kyoto, All Japan, 1200, Extreme Blade B Airwalk Spriggan, Tomoaki Honma and Kazushi Miyamoto and Sanshiro Takagi B Yuto Aiyama, and Hideki Hasaka and Shigeo Okamura, John Tenna and Gran Hamada B Super Dragon and Kendo Kashin, Genichiro Tenryu B Ryuji Hijikata, Gigantes and the Gladiator B Satoshi Kojima and Kaz Hayashi, Keiji Muto and Masa Fuchi and Jimmy Yang B Arashi and Nobutaka Araya and Nobukazu Hirai. Special thanks to Brian Alvarez, Jeff Marek, Alex Merves, Dominic Valenti, Mike Kuzmuk, Chad Smith, Scott Williams, Mike Coland, Todd Martin, Wes Jones, Chris Elner, Mike Matthews, Steve Katarski, Dave Shelto, Philip McConnell, Jimmy Daniel, Mark Falzer, Preston English, Aaron Wilson, Jim Lehman, Kevin McKenzie, Trent Walters, Ron Nemi, Jason Kettner, Wes Jones, Robert Bahari, Paul Fontaine, Jay Swing, Michael Kraus, Kelvin Clegg, Joel Colesrud, Maria Berry, George Letzos, Ken McLaughlin, Masanori Hori, Jay Valdez, Paul Sosnovsky, Clint Weber, Paul Armentano, Jason Combs, Bill King, Kurt Schulater, Matthew Jones, Clancy Gilpatrick, Kyle Steppen, Trent Walters, Jose Gonzalez, Christian Lenskjold, Gene Restaino, Chris Clark, Paul O'Brien, John Cassidy, Andrew Ryan, Stephen Lyon, Larry Goodman, Victor Martinez, Guy Bogard, Bob Barnett, Rob Hirashpool, Mr. St. Laurent, Brad Stutz, Dan Paris, Shannon Rose, Kyle Niblett, Carlton Prescott, Shane Wins, Sean Brown, Rich Vento, Jim Davis, Rob Block, David Aguilar, Joe Perez. Mexico, the Shocker vs. Ultimo Guerrero feud over the CMLL light heavyweight title continues at Arena Mexico. Guerrero won the belt in a classic match several weeks back. Shocker on February 7th won a non-title match to set up a title rematch on February 14th. Said to be another in their series of great matches. Shocker won the first fall with a spinning head scissors into abdominal stretch spot that shows he studies T2P tapes, or maybe Guerrero, who was on the January 19th show where they did the spot, told Shocker to try it out. Of course Guerrero won the second fall. Shocker won the third fall with a spinning backbreaker. If things go according to schedule, and more often than not of late, they don't, this should air in the US on February 23rd. Galavision hasn't aired any new shows in several weeks, enough time that people are worried they are no longer getting tapes. That next Arena Mexico show is considered a major deal because they are also going to culminate the undercard Ricky Marvin vs. Sumbito feud in hair vs. hair match. This was set up in a trios match with Marvin and Felino and Negro Casas losing to Damien El Terrible, not the same as the former WCW wrestler, and his nickname apparently describes him well, and Sumbito and Emilio Charles Jr., the world's ugliest wrestler, when Sumbito pinned Marvin clean with a double-leg fisherman buster. Vampiro is opening a self-defense school in Guadalajara, Puerto Rico. With WWC in bad condition, Carlos Colon has decided to modernize the television. They are trying to up the production value of the show and tighten it up. They had the old school mentality that everything from the moment the guy comes out of the back until the end is part of the match story, but are now going to edit the matches down. They are also planning on using women more and doing more elaborate storylines, especially for the mid-carders. The unmasking of Ray Gonzalez last week has made Colon think IWA made a huge political mistake because it strengthens their lawsuit. The IWA and Telemundo, which runs the IWA's TV station, are both blowing off the suit with the idea it means nothing. WWC drew poorly this weekend with IWA running shows within 10 minutes of them every night, seemingly like a shark looking to go for the kill, including starting to make offers for the few marketable guys left in the company. IWA was drawing huge and killing WWC since fans knew they were going to see Gonzalez without the mask. There seems to be a mentality in WWC that because they've hit bottom before and survived, that the promotion itself isn't letting on or isn't as stressed about the situation as most of the younger wrestlers. Of course, as history seems to show, the worst thing IWA could do is kill them dead, as it's much better to go against weakened competition and be the outright superior product, than being the only product. 01 Yoshihiro Takayama debuts for the group on March 2nd at Sumo Hall for their pay-per-view show, teaming with Hirotaka Yokoi, both guys having done matches for Pride, against Predator and Jimmy Snuka Jr. The big thing in the match is to build up Takayama vs. Predator as a program. All Japan Satoshi Kojima retained the MLW title in the main event on the first show of the current tour on February 8 at Korakuen Hall before a sellout 2,100 fans. Kojima pinned John Tenna in 9:19 after a lariat. Current tour features Gigantes, Jerry the Wall aka Malice Toot, The Gladiator, Mike Awesome, Penta, Jimmy Yang, Super Dragon, Extreme Blade Elix Skipper, and Airwalk Spriggan, Amazing Red under his second gimmick in as many tours, which cuts the heart out of the TNA X division for a few weeks. Gigantes in his debut teamed with Gladiator and Arashi over Keiji Muto and Masafuchi and Jimmy Yang when Gigantes pinned Yang in 11:50. The show quality for Korakuen Hall continued to decline, as both Spriggan, who was pushed at first as being the next Rey Mysterio Jr., but to show that he didn't get over with the new gimmick the way they expected. By February 11th in Kyoto he was already jobbing for Blade, and Gigantes didn't get over in their debuts, and the show only lasted 2 hours. The biggest thing on the show was after Kojima pinned Tenta, that 01's Hirotaka Yokoi, Kohei Sato and Yoji Side did a run-in attacking Kojima until a lot of All Japan undercard wrestlers made the save. The 01 trio grabbed the mic and cut a promo. They got great heat because people knew they were from 01. It's funny because the typical All Japan fan usually doesn't know most of the wrestlers from a company like 01, and many people had no idea who they were. The converse is that almost all the 01 fans know all the top guys from All Japan. Earlier in the show they had all the native wrestlers come to the ring for a ceremony to honor the Sheik. Sato and Yokoi debuted in All Japan the next night in Sendai, beating Shigeo Okamura and Hideki Hasaka, with Sato choking out Hasaka. After the match, the 01 wrestlers said they would teach All Japan wrestlers what real fighting was all about. After the main event the second night, they again attacked Kojima, and the surprising save came from Arashi and Nobutaka Araya, to give the idea that War and All Japan are uniting forces against 01. The February 23rd Budokan Hall show will have Muto vs. Shinya Hashimoto for the Triple Crown plus an 8-man tag with All Japan vs. 01. 884% Machine debuted on the February 10th show in Nagoya in the main event, teaming with 200% Machine, Yoji Anjo and Muto over Gladiator and Arashi and Yang, when 884% pinned Yang with a splash off the top. 884% wound up being Kaz Hayashi. On this tour they are doing the gimmick where Genichiro Tenryu gives singles matches to 7 different undercard wrestlers. Thus far he's beaten Araya, Hasaka, and Ryuji Hijikata. Pro Wrestling Noah NTV announced a 1-hour special on March 1st which will air the top matches from the March 1st Budokan Hall show. They will also on March 2nd air 25 more minutes of footage in the company's regular time slot. NTV gave them the special for the first Mitsuharu Misawa vs. Kena Kobashi singles match because the match setting it up, Misawa and Masahiro Chono vs. Kobashi and Akira Tao, set the company's all-time ratings record with a 6.3 in a post-midnight time slot, just about doubling the number 2 show in its time period. NTV aired a 90-minute post-midnight special on February 9th, airing highlights of the 2-day multi-promotional junior heavyweight tournament. The Toryuman team of Ultimo Dragon and Masato Yoshino scored wins over Jun Kasai and Grand Naniwa, independent team, and Kena and Kotaro Suzuki, Noah team, on the first night, leading to a win over Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Yoshito Sasaki, 01 team, in the finals in 2027 when Dragon used the Dragon Sleeper on Sasaki. Also in the tournament were Kohei Mikami and Kudo of the DDT promotion, Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Chocoball Mukai of Wu, Masao Orihara and Ikuto Hidaka, another indie team, and Great Takeru and Kapakozu. IWA team next tour is February 16th and March 1st, opening at Korakuen Hall with a trios match to further heat up the Misawa vs. Kobashi storyline. Foreigners on the tour are 2 Cold Scorpio, Michael Modest, Donovan Morgan, Bison Smith, and Superstar Steve. Vader is still out due to knee problems, and his absence makes a big difference. Kentaro Shiga is out of action due to a hernia, and he's expected to be out for several months. This is expected to result in a bigger push for younger wrestlers Kenta and Suzuki. For the March 1st Budokan show, it's really a one-match show at this point, as the other bouts announced are Jun Akiyama and Akatoshi Saito defending the GHC tag titles against Tomo Honda and Takashi Sugiura, Yoshihiro Takayama vs. Masao Inoue, and Scorpio vs. Yoshinari Ogawa. January 26th was a hot TV show with the junior tag title change. They aired the match where Jushin Liger and Koji Kanemoto regained the IWGP Junior belts from Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi. I just hope that it's not the end of the program because this has been a fun feud. Excellent match with great crowd heat. This feud has revitalized Kikuchi's career, since he was a dead character. Kanemoto played a great heel and carried the match, while Liger was the legend with credibility who was effective as a heel because he'd rarely played the role. Mostly heat on Kikuchi, with Kanemoto working over his legs with cool-looking dragon screws. Crowd was really into the submissions. Finish saw Liger do a number on Kikuchi with 2 Liger bombs, a brainbuster off the top rope, and the palm blow finish in 27-11. The last 15 minutes or so aired on television. 4 1/4 stars. February 2nd TV drew a 2.9 rating. New Japan Kengo Kimura's comeback, having worked several shows on this tour after not wrestling for several years, appears to be just a way to build to his official retirement ceremony. He is expected to announce his retirement and the date of his ceremony at the February 16th Sumo Hall show. There was a suggestion his retirement ceremony should be at the May 2 Tokyo Dome show, but Kimura felt that he wasn't a big enough star and it would be better in a smaller building. Seriously, Kimura's final match is expected to be against Tatsumi Fujinami, who he had his highest profile singles feud with after the two were tag team champions during the 80s. Koji Kanemoto retained the IWGP Junior title over K-Dojo's Minoru Fujita in 1706 on February 6th in Sendai before 2,500 fans. Also on that show was the final first-round match in the Tag Team Title Challengers Tournament, with Masahito Kakihara and Takashi Iizuka gaining revenge for their Tokyo Dome loss by beating Makai Club 4 and V when Iizuka pinned 4. The tournament semifinals were on February 9th in Osaka before a disappointing crowd of 2,200 fans at Rinkai Sports Center, Half House. Mike Barton and Jim Steele beat Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto in 11-16 when Barton pinned Saito, and Tadao Yasuda and Kazunari Murakami beat Takashi Iizuka and Masahito Kakihara, which stylistically had a chance to be good, in 9:42 when Yasuda knocked out Iizuka with his lack of boxing ability after Makai Club V attacked Iizuka. They have been building the V vs Iizuka program since Mitsuya Nagai jumped to New Japan to become Makai V. The tournament final was February 11th in Gifu before 3,000 fans, with Barton and Steele over Yasuda and Nakamura in 4:49 of a match which stylistically looked like a total disaster. Steele used his turbo drop on Murakami in the opening seconds, so Yasuda worked against both. Murakami then recovered and went wild, hitting the ref for the DQ. Fans booed this like crazy, and it wasn't the good kind of heat, but the negative star kind of heat. This set up Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan vs Barton and Steele for the IWGP tag titles on February 16th at Sumo Hall. But after the tag match, Chono said that both teams were terrible, so they would wrestle Yasuda and Murakami in a non-title match earlier in the show, then come back and wrestle Barton and Steele for the belts. In an undercard match in Gifu, Makai 4 and 5 wrestled Iizuka and Nakanishi. Iizuka was DQ'd for unmasking Makai V, revealing Mitsuya Nagai. Iizuka then challenged Nagai to a death match, stemming from the legit injury Iizuka got when his head moved south when Nagai's kick aimed at the chest hit the wrong target and put him out of action for more than a year legit. It would be the first death match, if it takes place, in New Japan in years. TJ Wilson returns as Stampede Kid on the March tour. January 18th TV was more from the Tokyo Dome and Budokan Hall. Daimajin Giant Silva under a mask build as being 7-10, and Makai Club I beat Saito and Goto via DQ in 7:50. Silva has improved to where he's decent, but like Andre did as Giant Machine, which this was a copy of, he loses a lot of charisma all covered up and wearing a mask. Nothing good or bad about the match. Very strange finish as ref Black Cat was struggling with Saito over a chair and Goto clocked Cat with a hard chair shot. Daimajin then did a sloppy Thunder Fire powerbomb on Saito and Cat signaled for the DQ. Kantaro Hoshino then counted the visionary pin. 1 1/4 stars, Makai Club 4 Katsuburi Shibata and V, Mitsuya Nagai, over Masahito Kakihara and Takashi Iizuka in 10:54. These new Makai Club members wear white t-shirts and white trunks, and their outfits look so cheap. But this was a good mix because all are well versed at kicks and submissions. Not much heat as the crowd expects that Makai Club guys to brawl and not trade holds on the mat. Good wrestling, ending with V pinning Iizuka after a springboard knee to the head. 3 stars. TV main was from the January 10th Noah Budokan show as they aired clips of the Chono and Mitsuharu Misawa vs Kena Kobashi and Akira Tao match. It had aired the previous week on the Noah show and was good, so I'd say overall a better than average show. January 25th TV was largely a junior heavyweight special built around nostalgia. Throughout the show they were showing clips of the original Tiger Mask vs. Kuniaki Kobayashi match from November 4, 1982. The clips, because of the time frame, saw the crowd and the attitude of the participants have so much more intensity than most modern matches. In fairness, it had more intensity than most matches in 1982 as well. That was during a golden period for the company. They only showed 90 seconds of the match at the end of the show, but it was the best 90 seconds of the show. Opener was from the Tokyo Dome with Nishimura pinning Tatsumi Fujinami in 8-10. The match was done Lancashire, England 70s style. Kind of dull early. It built into what would have been considered a good scientific match by the standards of 30 years ago. Not much heat, but a decent opener. 1.5 star. Next they showed the Minoru Suzuki win over Jushin Liger from the November 30th Pancrase show, which they've aired before. It seemed even crazier to show the company's junior heavyweight legend getting squashed in a one-sided match and choked out in 1:48 by a smaller guy long past his fighting prime. I don't think shoot matches belong on a pro wrestling television show, even though in Japan the audience for both is mixed, but especially airing a 2-month-old match where your guy gets squashed by a guy from a much smaller company. They next showed a clip from December 15th where Liger and Tiger Mask started their new issue after the miscommunication spots in a tag match. Then came the January 4th Dome match where Liger and Kanemoto and Takahiro Murahama beat Tiger Mask in the heat and Masayuki Naruse in 16-10. Spectacular open with a lot of big dives. Largely a good match. He needs to get rid of that gimmick because he's a dead character in it. There were some missed spots here and there, but hard kicks, good wrestling and good flying. This kind of match usually doesn't play well in the Dome, and it wasn't until late in the match the crowd got into it. Naruse took the match down, but it was understandable with his shoulder out. Well, also because he's not in the league with the rest of the guys. He was in the bout because he needed surgery and they were giving a public reason for it when Kanemoto brutally kicked the shoulder. Kanemoto ended up beating Naruse with an ankle lock. After the match, when the winners were in the interview area, he tried to attack all three but was overwhelmed. 3.25 stars. They also aired a segment where Tenzan was getting his new costume designed by Japanese rock and roll stars the Sex Machine Guns. They showed them in a room designing the costume, and showed Tenzan walking the streets of Tokyo in his Robocop-looking costume looking like something out of Lucha Libre. January 25th TV drew a 3.2 rating and February 1st drew a 3.4. Other Japan notes: Daniel Babish, the 340-pound former King of the Cage champion, will make his pro wrestling debut as Don Frye's tag team partner on the first WJ show on March 1st. It's being billed as a no-rules match with Hiroshi Hashi and Kensuke Sasaki at the Yokohama Arena. Match can only end in knockout or submission, with no pinfalls being counted, so make it appear to be more Vale Tudo style. Babish, who was an NCAA Division II heavyweight champion many years ago, fought one heavyweight tournament in UFC. And he lost to Mark Kerr in the finals on July 27, 1997 in Birmingham when Kerr used what was immediately made an illegal move after the fact, using his chin to attempt to smash the eyeball in 1:38. Babish, who started his career competing in brutal Vale Tudo matches in Brazil, going to the finals of an 8-man tournament before losing to Kevin Randleman, won his first UFC match on that same show in 2:11 over future pro wrestler Brian Johnston in just 2:11. He has a 7-4 record, with his losses coming at the hands of Carlos Barreto, Randleman, Kerr and a 46 loss to Jimmy Umbriz on August 2, where he lost his COC heavyweight title. He attempted to get a developmental deal with WWE recently, believe it or not. They thought he was too big. He's being billed in Japan as the former bodyguard and former sparring partner for Mike Tyson, which I don't know to be the case. Teihao Omori, who didn't sign his new contract offer from Noah a few weeks back, also jumped to WJ and will face Kenzo Suzuki on the debut show. Noah and Omori had problems dating back to when Omori left to work in the US, and basically found almost no work except for the stuff Harley Race could give him. Noah wouldn't allow Omori to do a scheduled WWE Dark match in Tulsa in December because they didn't want word coming back to Japan that one of their wrestlers jobbed for a low-level WWE guy. Steve Madison of the Florida-based IPW promotion has also been booked on the show, but no opponent has been named. Riki Choshu announced that WJ will not have a world champion, feeling there are too many of them and they mean nothing. But he did say they were going to have their own G1 Climax series during the summer, running major arenas in Tokyo. Choshu created the G1 Climax tournament and got it over in 1991 by, as the biggest star in the tournament, jobbing for both Masahiro Chono and Shinya Hashimoto in matches that made both instant superstars. So for the March 1st scorecard, WJ will be on pay-per-view, K1 will be on that night in primetime head-to-head, and I believe Noah will have pay-per-view live, but even if that has changed with the NTV special, the top matches on that show will air later that night on tape delay. Tsuyoshi Kosaka will be competing at the annual Abu Dhabi Submission Tournament in the heavyweight division. Also, Mark Kerr will come out of retirement for this non-striking shoot event to face Ricardo Arona. Kerr, a former champion at this, has told people that he can't fight without using painkillers and he can't live with painkillers, which is why he's turned down all fighting offers since the movie came out. He has been open to doing pro wrestling, but 01 hasn't wanted to use him. Michiko Omukai is leaving Urgent to become a free agent. Here and there, the Dallas Sportatorium, which was one of the most legendary wrestling buildings in the country, is in the process of being torn down. The building hasn't been used in years and they are taking the seating out of it before demolishing it. The 4,500-seat arena, known for its tremendous sight lines for wrestling and incredible sound, as well as for being a rundown dump in later years as arenas became more modern, housed Wrestling Weekly since the beginning of time. Dating back to the 50s, it was a regular Tuesday night stop on the Texas circuit, which later in the 80s and 90s became a Friday night tradition until wrestling eventually died out. Virtually every named wrestler, and most major recording stars of the 50s and 60s performed in the world-famous Sportatorium on the corner of Industrial and Cadiz. The building gained world fame in the early 80s when World Class Championship Wrestling had a worldwide syndication network with the shows taped in the building, during the glory days of the Von Erich brothers, particularly their legendary feuds with the Freebirds, Ric Flair and Gino Hernandez and Chris Adams. In 1983-84, the building sold out nearly every Friday night during a territorial boom, and it was also the building where Steve Austin had his first major program as a rookie against Adams. Axel Faulkner, 26, an Alabama-based independent wrestler, passed away from a massive heart attack on February 8 during a match for the ACW promotion run by Mickey Henry. ESPN magazine is planning a story on Bob Sapp. I don't expect it out for several months. The February 13th Weekly Gong magazine had 2 pages of coverage on the Observer Awards listing the top 10 place winners in most of the major categories along with photos of Angle as Wrestler of the Year, Sapp as biggest box office draw, Takayama as winner of the Bruiser Brody Award, Mysterio as winner of Best Flyer, Heyman as Best Non-Wrestler Personality and SmackDown as the Best TV Show. Reports of the February 8th Ring of Honor debut in New York at the Elks Lodge in Queens on February 8th was as good as any show in company history. They drew 675 fans, which was the largest crowd in the company's history and its hottest crowd of late. Among the highlight matches were a 4-way opener where Easy Money won over Michael Shane, Colt Cabana, and Chad Collier. Jay Briscoe pinned Mark Briscoe in what was reported as a 4 1/4 stars match, with Jay winning after 3 rolling Jay drillers. C.W. Anderson returned and continued his feud with Booker Gabe Sapolsky, who screamed he wasn't booked on the show. There was a 10-minute brawl with a group of wrestlers from the Long Island Wrestling Federation, where Low-Ki was originally trained, hitting the ring with security being incompetent in breaking it up. A lot of fans live were fooled into thinking this wasn't an angle. Reckless Youth no-showed and Anderson ended up taking his place, losing to CM Punk. American Dragon had a super stiff win over Samoa Joe in 15-22 that was said to be 4 1/4 stars. The show stealer was a 3-way for a title shot later in the show where Paul London won over AJ Styles, and Low-Ki in a 4 stars half match in 1850. All 3 were standing on the top rope for the finish. Low-Ki hit a top rope key crusher on Styles, and then London delivered a shooting star press. Xavier then demanded London take his title math right away, and London worked another 1933 before he was pinned using the ropes after London scored one near fall after another in another hot match in 1933. Show ended with a 34-minute 7-on-7 spot fest that apparently went way too long and that the crowd didn't like. The big deal is that Mikey Whipwreck is coming out of retirement. He's actually already worked some other indie shows in the area, and teamed with the Maximus and Divine Storm and Hit Squad as a mystery partner, and then turned on his former protégés and walked out on them. His team still won the match. Crowd was super hot and into everything but the last match. Raven debuts for Ring of Honor on March 15th in Cambridge, Massachusetts against CM Punk. They are also on March 22nd in Philadelphia setting up a working agreement with FWA in England as Daniels defends his FWA title against Doug Williams. CMLL ran a rare U.S. show on February 9th in Dallas, selling out the Bronco Bowl with more than 3,000 fans for a show billed locally as a Night of Legends. Main event was El Hijo del Santo and Atlantis over Brazo de Plata and La Parca. Ancient veteran Fishman, who's only 51, so he wasn't even the oldest wrestler in his match, that would be 53-year-old Cien Caras, worked the show. Haven't heard that name in years. The Crush Girls TV pilot shoot took place on February 3rd in Minneapolis, with a free taping in a 500-seat theater featuring 14 matches. This was done along the lines of the old Glow show in the 80s, and described as a cross between Laugh-In, a popular 70s TV show, Hee Haw, Ditto, The Man Show, and wrestling. John and Kevin Farley, the comedian brothers of the late Chris Farley, were behind the project, and Jimmy Hart was on-air commissioner, with the idea of producing something perhaps for Comedy Central. In an interesting twist, before the show started, Hart gave a speech and said a lot of the wrestlers were new, and that it was the first taping, and said everyone was here to have a good time but that there probably would be technical screw-ups and kinks to be worked out both in and out of the ring. That appeared to be a good psychological deal for the crowd because they didn't react badly when those glitches happened. Speaking of Hart, there will be a 1-hour pay-per-view using the XWF footage that never made air on March 16th, which means it goes head-to-head with Pride. When Piper appeared on February 4th on Best Damn Sports Show period to promote his book and rip of McMahon, when he brought up the Rikishi Stinkface, which for whatever reason, he always brings up in media discussions, he asked, "Have you ever had a 300-pound person in a thong sit on your face?" Tom Arnold responded, "Yeah, every night for a couple of years." Speaking of Piper, his situation with Portland Wrestling seems to change by the minute. He's no longer booking, but he will continue to appear on television. Piper's value is that he's the local wrestling superstar, and since the promotion totally relies on ad revenue and sponsorship, Piper's name is of course the one wrestler who everyone in the business community knows, plus, for the general public, his being on the show likely makes a difference in ratings. The February 6th tapings ended up having to be canceled because the state attorney general sent the promotion a cease and desist order at 3:30 p.m. that afternoon. The whole situation was a mess because the promotion had approval from the athletic commissioner, Jim Cassidy, before the promotion started, that they didn't need the usual licensing and approval of the commission for the shows because they weren't charging admission. Tapings are free at the WB studios in Portland. Numerous groups in Oregon run that way, using the term public workouts as opposed to pro wrestling cards, and have had no problems with the commission. Someone complained to the Attorney General about these non-sanctioned shows going on all over the place, and he confronted Cassidy about having a commission to regulate pro wrestling that is allowing pro wrestling to go unregulated. Cassidy contacted Frank Culbertson, who runs the promotion, at 11 a.m. that morning to tell him about it, and Culbertson suggested they get together early next week and figure out what they needed to do, and if he had to get a license, they'd get it done. Cassidy agreed, but a few hours later called again, saying things had changed, and at about the same time Culbertson had received a cease and desist order from the Attorney General, who is now going to crack down on various area promoters including Sandy Bar and Tito Carreon, who are running weekly unlicensed shows by not charging admission. Rather than give them time to get paperwork, they shut the show down and threatened to fine the promotion for running the previous shows illegally. Culbertson, Cassidy, and Steve Dant, the general manager of the WB affiliate that airs the show, met to try and reach a compromise on February 10th. At the meeting, Cassidy claimed that Captain Robert Miller of the police force, which enforces commission regulations, saw the show on TV and asked if the promoters and wrestlers were properly licensed, and Cassidy told him they weren't, and Miller went to the Attorney General. Dan at the meeting said that under the definition of pro wrestling in the law, the archaic laws of Oregon and Washington both have definitions of pro wrestling as if it is a sporting event, that what they do, a worked entertainment event, doesn't fall into the state's legal definition. Cassidy admitted that and said they were working on new legislation to properly define pro wrestling for what it really is. He told Dan and Culbertson that as long as they got licensed and the wrestlers got licensed, they'd look the other way on the other regulations. Dan wanted that put in writing, since Cassidy had told them before this got started that by not charging admission, they didn't have to conform to regulations. Cassidy refused to put it in writing, because of a precedent it might send, and the WB won't accept anything not in writing, so as of now, everything is in a stalemate. There is fear that if something happens and there is a no commissioner, any promise by Cassidy would be out the window, and they want this settled. Cassidy told them he'd try to get them a promoter's license in 2 weeks, which would force the company to either air a highlights show, a rerun show, or a show with no matches. If this wasn't settled and they couldn't tape this week, the idea seemed to be to have Piper in the ring and preview all the contestants in the Northwest Heavyweight title tournament. Cassidy is also trying to change regulations as it pertains to blood and drug testing to convince WWE it took a show in Portland, which the company hasn't run in 10 years, largely due to the fact that all wrestlers to get licensed have to pass a drug screening. None of the wrestlers could be contacted on February 6th, so all were in Portland, and that included the return of 43-year-old Nor the Barbarian, coming in from Minnesota. Luckily from a TV standpoint, They'd tape ahead, so still had one remaining show that aired on February 8th. They are hopeful of getting a few shows taped on February 13th once everything is worked out. A lot of the regulars who were written into TV no-showed, so it would have been a mess had there been taping, including Black Dragon, claiming his wife was about to give birth, Havoc, whose wife was about to give birth, Havoc not sure, and Ladies' Choice, couldn't get across the border from Canada. In addition, the lead sponsor, Rent-to-Own Auto, has pulled out, leaving the star of the show, Miss Rent-to-Own, who was being paid by the sponsor to appear, in question for the future, although she's expressed interest in continuing and they still want her as part of the show, but she'd have to get a new name. She is, besides being a local stripper, in a very campy TV commercial for Rent-to-Own Auto that airs in the city. The loss of the sponsor is said to be not as bad as it sounds, as others have expressed interest in filling the slot. The irony of the commission cracking down on the show is that two of the bookers, Mike Rogers, the longtime area historian and newsletter writer, Ring Around the Northwest, and Ed Moretti, were just about the only two people on the Oregon wrestling scene that have largely been pro-commission historically. The other two bookers with Piper out are TV announcer and the guy who runs the show, Culbertson, and Lynn the Grappler Denton, who was probably Don Owen's last successful booker. Denton underwent legit eye surgery this past week, and the plan is to show the surgery on TV. Moretti putting the lit cigar in his eye at the last taping was down to use the surgery for garnering interest. A couple of notes from the Sheik obit. Gypsy Joe claimed he was not Sheik's partner in their tag team. He said he was the second Gypsy Joe. Also, it appears Sheik's Toronto winning streak may have ended on August 11, 1974 with a DQ loss to Andre, and not the Tiger Jeet Singh match we mentioned, which was a few months later. Makes me wish I saved my wrestling newsletters from the 70s. I've heard different reports, as it appears most in Toronto still claim they remember the big night when Singh broke the streak. Also, even though some record books have a different result, Sammartino winning via bear hug, a live report on the December 14, 1974 Bruno Sammartino vs. Sheik WWF title match in Pittsburgh said that Sammartino had Sheik in a bear hug when manager Eddie Creechman interfered for the DQ finish, which given Sheik's rep, was more likely. The February 14 Sports Collectors Digest magazine ran a Sheik obit, and the photo accompanying it was of the Iron Sheik. Then again, it isn't like there aren't a few of those in the top 100 of all time. Sid Audi, Sid Vicious, who has talked about making a comeback in wrestling since his horrible leg injury has finally healed up, is currently working on an independent horror film called Stranded in Lula, Georgia. Audi is the star of the movie, in which the rest of the cast are members of the local high school drama class. I'm not making this up in what to my knowledge is the longest pro wrestling match in several years. Chris Hero, Chris Spradlin, won a 2 out of 3 falls match over CM Punk on February 7th in Clarksville, Indiana for IWA Mid-South, which went 92-15. Hero won the promotion's world title with the win. The bout was billed as having a 90-time limit, but each man had won one fall and they agreed to an overtime. Fans didn't appear to be bored at all with the length of the match, as they were popping for near falls in the last 10 minutes. The latest on the health issues of former wrestler Joey Rossi, Joe Rositano, are that he has cancer in his right lung and the center of his chest, as well as lesions on his liver and swelling in his adrenal gland. He was told by doctors he had a few months left to live. He's currently undergoing chemotherapy, and about a month ago his doctor, after a scan, felt the cancer may be in remission but wouldn't know for sure until a few more weeks. Kimball Anders, who played 10 seasons with the Kansas City Chiefs and made his wrestling debut on February 8 in Lenexa, Kansas, ended up being arrested after the show. It was barely a pro wrestling match, lasting only seconds before he defeated Brimstone with a body slam. He was then taken into custody by 3 local police for an outstanding warrant for contempt of court when he failed to appear in civil court for a 1999 child custody hearing. He posted $1,000 bond and was released. Earlier that night, he wrestled on the show to get his name back in the news and garner publicity for his new sports marketing company, but ended up getting the wrong kind of publicity. The show drew less than 100 fans, and even with all the local publicity about Anders' debut, the crowd was about what the promotion, Central States Wrestling, usually does. Anders, 36, rushed for 2,261 yards as a journeyman blocking back for the Chiefs. He never actually retired from football and has continued to train, awaiting a phone call that still hasn't come after the Chiefs cut him prior to the 2001 season. He said in an article in the Kansas City Star Sports section that it's also his only match, as he has no intention of wrestling again. He put over wrestling as well, saying, "I saw some guy, he was like 6'9", weighed 320, and was way more athletic than any football player I ever saw. No, I don't think I'm going to do this again." I'm just wondering who he was referring to. A follow-up on the roller derby /game/wrestling crossovers from 2 weeks ago, courtesy of former Roller Games ref and longtime subscriber Tom Worsterfer. Ed Darian, real name Streaky Degirian, who did the TV announcing for the Eastern Warriors Roller Games team in the 70s, was also the ring announcer, with Buddy Wagner at the WWF shows at the Spectrum in Philadelphia during the mid to late 70s. The only wrestling on TV anyone can remember he did was 1 week of syndicated TV for WWF as the ring announcer. He tried out on the same taping that Gary Capetta did, and Capetta was the one who ended up with the job. Wagner also had a crossover. In 1976, when Bill Griffiths decided to fold the Warriors, Wagner, Frank Gelb, a local boxing promoter, and Natopi, owner of the Philadelphia Arena, bought rights to the Warriors name to try and continue the team at the arena, with Wagner doing the TV announcing. Wagner died a few months later and the company folded. Matilda the Hun de Boer is confirmed as both doing Glow Wrestling and later working as a heel for Roller Games in Los Angeles. Eric Page, who was a WWF TV announcer in the late 60s, had also done roller derby in San Francisco with Walt Harris in the early 60s, and for a few months in 1970 did the announcing for the Eastern Warriors. Regular announcer Elmer Anderson was trying to set up a new franchise in Florida that failed. Danny Wolf, who I should have known right off the bat, did announcing for Roller Jam, as well as other attempts at derby revivals, and has bounced around the Southern California indie wrestling scene for years and actually wrestles on Johnny Legend shows. Dick Holloway, who announced for the Roller Games in the 80s, known for the phrase "Oh my" as his signature, also announced briefly for California Championship Wrestling, a short-lived Southern California group. Worsterfer couldn't find any record of Burt Prentice skating, although if he had skated, it would have been under another name. Nobody has been able to find any records of John Parker wrestling. Don Lastra has refereed for indie wrestling in Southern California as well as Roller Games in its heyday, the recent Roller Jam, and a dozen revival attempts in between. Another 2 names I should have known as a crossover were Miguel Alonso and Stu Gans. Alonso's career in sports entertainment broadcasting has to go back 35 years minimum. Alonso was the voice of the wrestling, Label Promotions _ and Roller Games, both Los Angeles Thunderbirds as well as the Latin Libertadores when the Roller Games made an attempt to market to Latin fans with an all-Latino team circa 1974 which quickly failed, as did the entire operation, from the Olympic Auditorium when both appeared on the old Spanish International Network. He also worked for both WWF and WCW at various times including up through a few years ago doing Spanish language announcing. Gans was the ring announcer for wrestling in Northern California from 1983-95 for WWF, as well as ring announcer on the Wrestling Gold tapes that Jim Cornette and I did voiceover work on. He also did the color commentary for the David Lipschultz version of Roller Derby in the 80s on ESPN, a Northern California revival of the Bay Bombers using mainly skaters from the glory period, when the network was first getting off the ground and just looking for any kind of sports product to fill time, and they broadcasted the events as if it was a legitimate sporting event. Speaking of crossovers, many people around the country heard Tony Schiavone doing stringer work at the NBA All-Star Game in Atlanta on February 9th for radio stations around the country, most notably WFAN in New York. Apez Watley came home from the hospital on February 7th. He was down to 167 pounds and his health problems have left him with a case of gout and a very weak right arm. He's having to relearn how to get in and out of bed by himself. Frontier Wrestling Alliance drew a sellout 790 fans, some fans let in free with ticket stubs to the UWF fiasco reported on last week, in London, England to see an Iron Man match where Doug Williams beat Jerry Lynn in 30 minutes by a 3-2 score, leading to a Williams challenge of FWA champ Christopher Daniels when Daniels returns to the UK. Juventud Guerrera vs Johnny Storm earlier in the show was reported as the best match, as part of the XPW European title tournament in which Storm goes into the finals on March 16 in Broxbourne, England. John Farr, UWF promoter, showed up as they tried to turn last week into an angle where he blamed FWA for his ring not showing up, which elicited responses of "This isn't heel heat" and "Please go home." Former UFC fighter Ian Freeman was backstage and they did a tease that he was coming out, similar to the deal WWE did with Kane before he finally returned. He was blown away by Guerrera and Storm, saying he was amazed at what great athletes the two were. There has been talk of building to a Freeman vs. Flash Barker match. Barker is known in British circles as a shooter, but that may not be possible because Freeman's sponsors may not like the idea of him doing a worked match. 70s British star Pat Roach, who worked in California as a wrestler in the 70s and has some high-level movie credits, was brought in on the show as figurehead commissioner. With a week advance for its second event at the new CZW Arena, The promotion advertised Kevin Sullivan on its February 8th show. Sullivan no-showed and no announcement or acknowledgement was made. Acknowledgements of no-shows Tony Mamaluke and Jimmy Rave were said to promoter Zandig, who took the blame for them. In a surprise, Tatanka appeared. They also announced that their annual Best of the Best show will be on April 12th. They have a new lead hill team called High Five to get the fans to change HIV at them, of Messiah, Backseat Boys and 2 other guys. The women's bathroom overflowed and water spilled out all over the arena. That was not a planned angle, but no doubt some clever promoter soon will try to reprise it. A correction from the Tough Enough story. Hawk Yunkins and Kenny Mayne both briefly played football at the University of South Florida in Tampa. We have listed them as having played for the University of Tampa, which dropped football in the 80s. Jonah Adelman has joined both the Chaotic Wrestling School and joined Killer Kowalski School in Reading, Massachusetts this past week. Danny from Tough Enough 2 also trains with Kowalski and has a different look, and he and Jonah have been doing tag team matches on Northeastern Indie shows. Christopher Nowinski trained with Kowalski before Tough Enough 1. Was told by one of the trainees that Jonah isn't bad for his level of training. In fact, on February 8th, 8 X-Day wrestlers were working indie shows. Danny and Jonah teamed up for WWA in Pepperell, Massachusetts, and Mayne and Yunkins teamed for Revolution Pro at City of Industry, California, while Greg, Tough Enough 1, worked for CZW and Linda Miles, and Jackie Gaeta worked the OVW show in Fortville, Indiana, and Justin, a late cut in Tough Enough 3, worked as a manager at the IPW show in St. Petersburg. Added to that, you have Nowinski on ABC World News Tonight and Josh Matthews as host of Velocity also on that night. Justin Credible's first major match since his WWE firing was February 9th in Pottstown, Pennsylvania for the Premier Wrestling Federation, winning their championship from Steve Corino, who had beaten Mikey Whipwreck for the vacant title just minutes earlier. NWA TNA, something of an uneventful show on February 5th. Poll results were 17 thumbs up, 33.3%, 18 down, 35.3%, and 16 in the middle, 31.4%. Best match was Brian Lee and Slash vs. Low Key and Elix Skipper with 32, and worst was Trinity vs. Desire with 17 and Jorge Estrada vs. Glenn Gilberti with 14. The show had a lot of good interviews, since the one thing a lot of the veteran talent they've brought in of late can do is promos, when you have Dusty Rhodes, Raven Conan, and Larry Zbyszko. In the main event, the tag titles ended up held up between 30 Elix Skipper, Christopher Daniels and Low Key as a trio using the old free bird rules, this time because Daniels and Low Key have so many Japanese commitments that neither are available enough on their own, versus Jim Mitchell's New Church, Brian Lee and Slash, when they did a double pin finish in 15:32 of a 3 stars match, which was the only bout on the show to have strong heat, as Low Key pinned Lee, man did that size difference look bad, and Slash pinned Skipper. The ref deserves a lot of praise in the Low Key deal because their pin was set up several seconds ahead. They did a ref bump, and a second ref run in so each ref would count one of the falls. The ref bumped, I think Andrew Thomas, seeing the problem, acted groggy a little longer so the double pin timing worked. Match was the best one on the show and better than I expected because Slash worked the whole way and sold. Still not the best use of Low Key, but the spots that couldn't work, with Lee, deceptively huge, versus Low Key, were kept to a minimum. Raven still hasn't done a match, this week doing an angle where he broke the fingers of AJ Styles. The plan seems to be to turn Styles back face. They did another old Austin angle as the Russo group, all wearing masks and army fatigues, kidnapped Jarrett. Rhodes did his cameo, doing one promo and then leaving to find Jarrett. Show ended with Russo in the ring talking to a masked guy wearing Glenn Gilberti's former Disco Inferno clothes and apparently him, but then Gilberti crawled down the ramp in his underwear. Stone Cold Jarrett unmasked to attack Russo as the show went off the air. After the show went off the air, the heels massacred Jarrett as Raven tied him to the ring post and they all whipped his back with a belt, leaving cuts and welts. Sonny Siaki retained the X belt over Amazing Red due to interference of Desire. The reason Red didn't win the title, since he was slated to win it a few weeks back and get Siaki out of the X division, is that Red is going back to All Japan for the next tour. The plan was to get the belt to Kid Cash. Mike Tenay was toned down and used as just a straight announcer. Conan did what was described as the most well-prepared interview in the history of the company, as he was studying notes all day. Apparently he cut a first interview, which was said to be even better than the one that aired, but Jerry Jarrett felt, at about 7 minutes, was too long. He did a second shorter but similar one. He brought up racism against Latinos, but his delivery almost made him a babyface doing so. While claiming Jarrett, Vince McMahon and Eric Bischoff were racist promoters and there were a lack of Latinos in power, and bringing up that boxing is largely carried by Latinos on pay-per-view, noting most of the big draws behind Tyson are Latinos, and talked about Latinos in other sports like baseball, as well as bringing up his own track record as a draw in Mexico and California. The story he told about Mike Tenay being in a restaurant in Tijuana when the soap opera Conan was playing on television, and when Conan appeared on the screen, everyone in the restaurant stopped working and watched intently, was a true story. I believe Chris Cruz was with him as they were studying for the When Worlds Collide pay-per-view in 1994, which is highly recommended if you've never seen it, as one of the best pay-per-view shows of all time. Tenay in that era regularly attended matches in Tijuana when Mysterio Jr. and Juventud Guerrera were starting out, and Love Machine and Eddie Guerrero were the top tag team. There is talk of Conan leading a Mexican contingent against the X Division guys, but that would work better if people like Daniels and Low-Ki were in the X Division as singles wrestlers. Super Crazy has been talked about. Ricky Marvin, who is another name considered, has no proper paperwork, and another name thrown around was Volador Jr. Juventud Guerrera has expressed interest, but his reputation has taken a beating since the end of WCW. The Conan Paco Alonso EMLL head feud that dates back to 1992 and the formation of AAA, when Conan and Antonio Pena took so much of Alonso's talent, makes it impossible to use any of the top EMLL stars like Shocker, Blue Panther, Black Tiger, or Mr. Niebla. Black Warrior, who would be a natural, unless they quit EMLL. Tenacious Z debuted on the national stage and they gave him a win over BG James. The story on him is that when he was 8 years old, he lost one of his legs from the hip down due to cancer. While in the hospital, true story, he was visited by Hulk Hogan, who inspired him to become a pro wrestler. It's a very weird deal because on one hand, he deserves probably more credit than anyone in this business for what he can do given his handicap. He has 3 impressive spots, which are the one-legged dropkick, the leg lariat, and the Osai moonsault, and how he gets so high and does these moves is phenomenal. But on the other end, because of his limitations, he comes across more as a novelty attraction. I heard everyone loved him and his attitude, and I think he should be able to get legit mainstream pub for what he's been able to do. I would have expected a much bigger crowd reaction when he pinned James. Ref Scott Armstrong, feuding with his brother, kicked his brother low to set up the inside cradle finish. The feeling was he tore the house down in a dark match the previous week, and the same fans didn't pop that much seeing him a second time. Others said the place was about to give him an impressive standing ovation again, but they had Raven hit the ring to attack him right away, which cut off the moment. His match the previous week, against trainer Truth Martini, was also said to be better. Part of the strongly ingrained knowledge that it is all a work as opposed to people knowing but not having it shoved in their face while watching the show in the modern era, is the big upset doesn't get the pop it did in the past. Older fans can remember 1-2-3 Kid over Razor Ramon or the Mulkeys over Gladiators on TBS, the latter which wasn't capitalized but was one of the most memorable moments on wrestling in that era, both of which made the Job guys into cult favorites in one match. There is some interest in using Dale Torborg, since he wants to wrestle and has ability to get mainstream press because he's the strength coach of the Florida Marlins and his father was a famous player and manager. Another name under consideration is Paul London as an X-Division wrestler, who would be great addition. Don West was very upset during the broadcast when Russo threw water all over him off camera. In the post-match brawl, which went about 10 minutes, after the tag title match, the stage manager was momentarily knocked cold when Lee landed on her. Trinity was the stunt woman for Jennifer Garner in the movie Daredevil. She is turning out to be a lot like Lita, in that she can get over doing high spots during a men's match, but in the ring doing a match on her own, she hurts her cause. She's more athletic than Lita, but doesn't have Lita's charisma. Barry Buchanan was backstage at the show. Bob Ryder called up Paul London over the weekend and he was scheduled to start before you are reading this. We got a lot of viewer complaints about the fact that so many of the best wrestlers on the show, Styles, Jarrett, Raven, Harris, and Storm and Cash, didn't wrestle on the show, and that Red and Low-Ki were both put in matches where they couldn't show their talents. Raven, Sanders, Russo, and Gilberti, who travel from Atlanta to Nashville together every week, have talked about having someone film their drives where they brainstorm about wrestling and trying to sell the tapes. MMA, some more notes on the arrest of Kazuyoshi Ishii from last week. The December indictment was based on tax evasion through 1998. The second charge and arrest last week was based on tax evasion in 1999 and 2000. The government claimed Ishii owed the government $1.47 million in taxes over those 2 years by concealing 535 million yen, $4.46 million, in income. Ishii, in his tax filing for 2000, claimed the company suffered $8.3 million in debt as a payment to Mike Tyson after some sort of a contract breach after negotiations to bring him in went sour, as mentioned last week. The government alleges that no such negotiations ever took place, and that she had submitted a document to authorities of a contract with Tyson that they claim was forged. Announced for the March 16th Pride pay-per-view officially is Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira vs. Fedor Emelianenko for their World Heavyweight title. This isn't a money match, but this is Nogueira's toughest true test to date, as Fedor appears to be a stronger wrestler than Nogueira, who can do damage on the ground, and is well versed in submissions as a world-class Sambo fighter. Also, twin brother Antonio Rogerio Nogueira faces Kazuhiro Nakamura, who is the 23-turns-24 next week-year-old protege of Hidehiko Yoshida. Nakamura was the 2001 Japanese national champion in judo in 220-pound weight division. Also, Quinton Jackson has been talked with of late as facing Kevin Randleman, although as mentioned last week when he was talked with about Ricardo Arona, it means little until it's announced because they change directions frequently. Although Kazushi Sakuraba in the past has talked about fighting on the show, his knee isn't close to ready. What he's saying now is that he'll wait until the end of February and decide whether he can gut it out, but there is no way he'll be at anything close to his best. In his last fight, just after blowing out the knee, he looked unimpressive. UFC 42 has been moved from the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas to the American Airlines Arena in Miami on April 25th. The move was apparently due to them wanting to go back to Las Vegas with the Tito Ortiz vs. Chuck Liddell main event and Ortiz refusing to sign for it, saying he was injured and didn't have enough time to properly train. Only match announced for April 25th is Matt Hughes defending the welterweight title against Sean Shirk. Dana White said on Live Audio Wrestling in Toronto that the plan was to run the MGM Garden Arena in June when the Ortiz vs. Liddell fight is now scheduled. White also said they were looking at signing Joe Rogan to a full-time deal as an announcer, that they are willing to bring back Genki Sudo, who canceled his appearance on February 28th, claiming a hip injury, and then signed for a March 1st K1 fight, for a title shot at the winner of the February 28th Cool Uno vs. BJ Penn lightweight title match. He said he was hopeful of getting Murilo Bustamante, the middleweight champion, to return and defend, theoretically against the Matt Lindland vs. Phil Baroni winner on February 28th, and when asked about the proposed Ken Shamrock vs. Vitor Belfort match, said Shamrock was taking some time off before fighting again, but that the match is a possibility. Rich Clemente has been announced as the opponent for Yves Edwards in what was originally the Genki Sudo vs. Josh Thompson spot on the February 28th UFC show. Pro wrestler Takahiro Murahama of Osaka Pro is scheduled to face Hiroyuki Abe of Shudo on the March 1st K1 show. The second major K1 show in Japan of the year will be March 30th at the Saitama Super Arena, and they're looking at it as a show with all the major stars appearing: Sap, Ernesto Hus, Mirko Cro Cop, Mark Hunt, Peter Aerts, and Ray Sefo. WWE: it appears the deal with Hogan and WWE has only been agreed to through WrestleMania. At that point, both sides will re-evaluate the situation and see where they want to go from there. Hogan may have signed a longer contract, don't know the details, since last year the situation was somewhat similar, in that Hogan signed a one-year deal, but at the time nobody expected him to be a regular or wrestle as often as he wound up wrestling because the crowd pops were so big they thought they needed him, even though the numbers told a different story. The network partners TNN and UPN have been told to expect more surprises between now and Mania, and were put on the alert that the long-term plan is for Rock to be a regular on Raw and Austin on SmackDown. On the Goldberg front, at this point it still appears to not be close to a deal. Both sides are looking at the next week or two as something of an unofficial deadline if they are looking to get something done for WrestleMania. As noted before, on both of Goldberg's last two negotiations, for the W1 shows in Japan, it also looked unlikely just days before the show and he made the last-minute deal both times, so I don't count anything out, other than from a company perspective. The summer would be better for him than Mania. The WWE's last offer to him was for 10 days per month maximum, and the WWE can book him for no more than 100 dates per year. WWE wants to have full control on assigning him at least 100 dates. Goldberg is more amenable to working more dates than before, although still not as many as WWE wants. He's also asking for an allowance for vacation time if he wants it, as well as creative control of his programs. A follow-up on the ECW sale from Chad Smith at OtherArena.com. The guidelines for the sale were approved on February 6th and a hearing to close the deal is scheduled for March 14th. The lawsuit against TNN, as has been pushed by some of the creditors, is technically not dead until March 14th, but is highly unlikely at this point since the trustee, Barbara Balaber Strauss, would have to file. Filing that suit would put into jeopardy the agreed-upon deal with WWE with no guarantees they'd be able to retrieve any money in a TNN lawsuit that would kill the WWE deal. It should be noted that WWE's purchase of the ECW name and intellectual property should thrill TNN and Viacom, because it kills whatever lawsuit possibility 3 was forevermore. There will be a public auction advertised in Variety magazine before February 20th. What WWE is planning on buying are all the names of wrestlers owned by ECW, their likenesses for future marketing, still photos and rights to use the videotapes. WWE will also be due any future royalties from Pioneer Home Video or In Demand. American Cable Production owns the videotapes themselves and WWE will be buying from them for $243,000. WWE will be entitled to receive its share of losses from both what American Cable is owed from the estate, since in buying the tapes, they're buying the claim, as well as from their own loans to ECW. So they are not eating a $600,000 debt as part of the buying process, although they are only going to get a small percentage of that money back. The minimum bid for the ECW estate, which WWE has already agreed to, is $1,305,000, and a 10% deposit has to be placed at the time of the bid, and all the money due has 30 days from March 14th to be paid or it will be forfeited. The 3 shows in the Far East from January 23rd through January 25th ended grossing an amazing $4 million between the live gate and merchandise sales. Austin returned after Raw went off the air on February 10th in Los Angeles. It was undecided at press time whether Austin would be in Toronto, although it's pretty much a sure thing he won't appear on television if he is. Austin looked a lot heavier than anyone had seen him. Place went nuts for 15 minutes straight. The crowd chanted what like crazy at him. He was violating probation like crazy by drinking tons of beers and giving stunners to everyone. He was arguing with Bischoff, and Morley got in Austin's face, only to take a few stunners. Jericho came out to drink beer with Austin giving him a stunner. He then beat up Morley some more and ended the show drinking another beer with Ross. People who were at both shows claimed Austin's pop was louder than Hogan's in Albany. No Way Out on February 23rd in Montreal looks to be Rock vs. Hogan, Austin vs. Bischoff, Triple H vs. Steiner for Raw title, Lesnar and Benoit and Edge vs. Angle and Benjamin and Haas, Jericho vs. Test, Undertaker vs. Show, not officially announced, but expected, and Kidman vs. Matt Hardy for the Cruiserweight title, again not officially announced. Raw on February 10th in Los Angeles was built around Jim Ross and Eric Bischoff getting fired, and replaced at the end of the show by Jim Ross and Eric Bischoff. The Bischoff D-Day show opened with Bischoff admitting that he hadn't signed Austin, and blamed Ross for Austin not signing. Ross brought up that Bischoff fired Austin in WCW and said he wasn't marketable enough to make it. Bischoff ended up firing Ross unless he guaranteed that Austin would be at No Way Out. I guess it worked out in the end with the angle, but they must never pair Coachman up with Lawler again. It was made worse by Lawler acting like he was helpless and hopeless without Ross holding his hand. Coachman kept saying how this is Junior's job. Test pinned Christian in 306 with a full Nelson slam. The announcing was reminding me of Harry Thornton, a Chattanooga announcer who may have been the all-time worst. Christian hit Test with the unprettier after the match and then stalked Keibler. Jeff Hardy made the save. Later in the show, Test didn't seem happy with Keibler, thinking there was a reason Jeff made the save. Yeah, because they've given up on Jeff's heel turn. Booker wasn't down with the Brown, and squashed the Brown in 120 with an axe kick. Teddy Long said that they should be a tag team. Chaz beat Molly in 336 with an STF. Decent match with no heat. After the match, Chaz put Molly in the double chicken wing. Ross was hanging out in the parking garage talking to Steve, while Howard Finkel tried to find out the scoop. Ross blew off Finkel, explaining he wasn't talking to Austin, who he hasn't been able to reach, but talking with his friend Steve from Oklahoma. Oh my god, Dr. Death does need a job. Kane and RVD beat Rosie and Jamal in 409 when RVD pinned Jamal with a frog splash. The Samoans didn't work well with Van Dam at all. Then again, they don't seem to work well with anyone. Vince showed up and saw Junior in the parking garage. He seemed upset he was not announcing Raw. Hey, when this company hired Ernest Miller as an announcer, they can't be upset about announcing. Vince came out in his over-the-top fashion and looked to be having far too much fun. He said he wouldn't fire Morley, but Morley had to beat all 3 Dudleys in a handicap bout to keep his job. After a lengthy tease, including Bischoff attempting to keep his job by providing Vince with bisexual lesbians, Bischoff will never get to live down that Gold Club deal. Vince blew off the women and fired Bischoff, and sang a goodbye song. Singing is clearly not one of Vince's talents. Dudley's destroyed Morley in 346 with a 3D and Spike getting the pin. Bubba power bombed him off the middle rope through a table. During the commercial break, Rob Reiner's children were invited into the ring and the Dudleys gave him a piece of the table. Bubba taught him to do a crotch chop and say suck it. Bischoff was in the parking lot and wanted to shake hands with Ross, saying all their problems were business and not personal. Ross blew him off. Batista powerbombed Dreamer in 29. Coach had no idea if the bell had rung, even though it clearly had. Keebler said she had gotten Test a marketing deal with a company called GGW Girls Gone Wild pay-per-view, which Bischoff talked WWE into getting involved with. Jericho beat Jeff Hardy in 10:42 with the Walls. Jeff's best match in a while. Unfortunately, the crowd wasn't paying attention as a couple of drunk women were engaging in HLA for real after some people in their section started egging them on. Security calmed things down, but not before it was clear the cheers and boos had nothing to do with the match. Vince announced for the February 17th show in Columbus that the main event would be Triple H and Batista versus Steiner and Booker. Vince was about to announce the new general manager when Ross came out. Crowd popped pretty big, thinking he'd gotten a promotion. But he instead told Vince that he convinced Austin to come to No Way Out. Jr. was reinstated, and not a minute too soon. Vince agreed to rehire Bischoff and Morley, but wanted Bischoff to kiss his ass. He pulled down his pants, although he wasn't going nearly as nutty as he did with this angle at the end of 2001. Bischoff refused to kiss Vince's ass, so Vince instead ordered him to wrestle Austin on pay-per-view. SmackDown notes from February 11th in Bakersfield. Said to be a solid show with good crowd reactions, but nothing in the way of the great matches SmackDown usually has. Haas pinned Edge when Edge speared Heyman, allowing Haas to cradle him from behind. Rikishi vs. Nunzio had no winner as Nunzio's new partners in the Italian Army, Palumbo and Johnny Stamboli, did run-ins. Angle was hitting on Stephanie and about to kiss her, when Lesnar showed up. Mysterio pinned Matt Hardy with a Hurricane Rana. Sounds to me like Hardy will get the Cruiserweight belt and this sets up Mysterio as a challenger. So they are going to do that feud after all? DeMott attacked Kendrick after praising him for having guts. Benoit beat A-Train with the crossface. Sounds like Heyman was back in more control. They plugged the Girls Gone Wild pay-per-view. Another crate was delivered as a present for Undertaker. This time it was Kanyon in the crate. Undertaker destroyed Kanyon on his return. No wonder the guy wanted to stay in OVW. Benjamin pinned Eddie Guerrero with a superkick. Said to be good, but not on the level of most of Guerrero's recent bouts. Hugh Hefner was on saying that a WWE diva would be appearing on the cover of his magazine soon, but never said who it would be. Tori Wilson beat Dawn Marie Wilson in a bra and panties match. After the match, Nydia attacked Tori, but Tori ended up cleaning house on both of them. Lesnar pinned Cena after the F5 in the TV main, which was said to be watchable, but nothing more. They announced Hogan would appear next week in Indianapolis.